And then I can go into my database here. And we can grab the connection string from here. So I'm going to grab that. Now, remember when I initially installed the database, I made it no access. Microsoft does offer you what they call uh, a firewall, which we're going to set up. And then we have to have a selected network. Now, if you had private access, you can set up a private endpoint here. If you then I'll lock it down as well. But you probably need to set up selected networks. You can add it to a virtual network or VNets. And then you add a VNet rule in here, and that way to force traffic to only allow traffic only to people that are inside of the a virtual network. The other option is to add a firewall rule here that represents your IP address, right? This is what we're going to do here. IPv6, I don't know why they have IPv6 here because we're not using IPv6 anyway. So even if I add this in here, it will work. But it says it's not supported. I'm not sure why they do it, but I'll get the IP address in a minute. Let me just go back to here. I want to paste this connection string in here that we originally got from this. And I'll put the password. And we can apply that. So now we're in. And in the meantime, while I was doing, I will get my IP address. Set up. All right, so that this is set up here. The next one we have to do is we have to do a timer interval. Now this timer interval here is going to be used to watch the secure FTP drops that we're going to be configuring later on when moving large files. So we're going to set it up. And Azure Function is going to be responsible for a lot of things. It's going to be responsible for picking the file up, moving the file into a service bus, taking the file off the service bus, right into a SQL database. So again, this function app is very responsible for doing a lot of things in one place. So we want to see how efficient it is for it to manage all that. What's going on over here? Just click that and it disappeared. Try that one more time. Yeah. Okay, sorry about that. Some kind of delay here. Maybe it was my internet just was acting crazy. And then it was sending to 1 minute. So that's basically what we're doing. So every minute you're going to go in. We're using a cron job, send it to 1 minute. And if we go back to documentation, this piece is done. So we can go back to here, hit apply, hit confirm, and then we can move down to the next steps. We're going to come back to this in a minute. We're going to create a couple of containers here. This is where we're creating those configs. So now we spent some time in the function app. We can start focusing on the other resources that were provisioned. So I'm going to go back here into my, and we're going to open up the storage account, which is the next one we're going to look at. All right, so the storage account here, there's a couple of things in here. Storage account has containers, file shares, queues, and tables. Very, very powerful resource, and another resource you put in your back pocket if you are going to provide some implementation solutions to businesses. We're going to be adding some things in the container, but before I do that, I'll need to, because we're not using Intra, Microsoft is pushing a lot of resources to use Intra, which makes sense because because for security it makes sense. So you have to disable that. So I'm going to disable the Intra option here, save that, go back up here, go into our containers now. Now we can keep going and do what we need to do. There's a couple of containers here that Microsoft is using for the deployment that we did earlier when we pushed out the Azure function. We're just going to take advantage and add more containers that we need. So we need a config container, which is what we're going to add in here. Go back to documentation. We need a pickup. And we also need a process folder. Should grab it here as well. So that's done. So that's piece is done. We'll go back to our documentation. And then we're going to add a couple of tables. We're going to add tables. So this Azure this storage account also supports NoSQL databases as well. So that's what we're going to take advantage of. So we're adding a table here, one for the batch files. So that's not what I wanted to do. Add that. And then we're going to go back to our documentation. I'm going to add a training folder here. Put that in. I'm going to call it training 2025-01. Oh, 0108. That's it. And then let's get rid of that. So we have our two additional tables in here. So let's go back to our documentation. Just get rid of that. We don't need that anymore. We don't need this anymore. Then in the share, this is the share where, and it tells you create a share location for the secure FTP to drop files. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a share now. So I did, we just spent some time in the containers and the tables. Now we're going to add files to our file share. And the file shares are very good because file shares give you a significant amount of space. When I say significant, 100 terabytes. So you're moving a lot of data from on-prem into Azure. This is the way to go, right? You can, if you're moving maybe 50 terabytes or so. I must say that's a large amount of files, and you want to do over the network, then that might cost some money. But if you're actually doing a data box where you have Maxwell gives you a box, send it to your house or your business, and then you do a backup and restore when they attach it to Azure, they will put it into what we call a file share. And this is similar to what you're looking at here. So let me make sure I got this right. So it's 2025 01 08. Sorry. Now when you hit next, instead of your file share, because of the nature of the data you're moving, Microsoft offers defaults. They default a backup. So if you're very careful, if you're not careful, Microsoft will just set this up for you and set it up to run every day. So I tend to uncheck it because it's just training. It's very hard to get rid of it once you set it up because it goes continuously running. And as that's done, let's go back to the next thing. All right, so we're going to shift over to if this is the final step, then we can start doing some testing at some point. Yeah, testing after this. So we can go, we're going to go and look at the service bus. So we spend time in the storage account, Azure Functions. Now we're going to look at the service bus. Now, service bus basically supports two entities, right? You have the queues and you have the topics. Now, if you're a typical, if you don't MSMQ or anything to WebSphere or even Microsoft queuing systems, it's really a FIFO, right? First in, first out, one consumer, one producer, right? Topics allows you to have one producer and or multiple producers and multiple consumers. So it's a one-to-many relationship where if I'm producing data, I'm publishing into one request endpoint, I can have multiple subscribers picking up that data. So we're going to create a topic, which is what we're doing right now. We're going to leave the defaults, means that the maximum amount of data that's going to be pushed to this is 1 gig. It's going to keep it for 14 days if it's not, if the message doesn't get picked up. Then once you've created your publisher endpoint, you need to add a couple of subscribers to it. So in this case, we have a subscription. The people that are going to be pulling the messages off. We're going to have one for our NoSQL database. And we're going to also have one for our SQL database. Now, on the subscription side, it's slightly different because you have to try to pull the data at least 10 times. So this says the delivery count. And if for some reason the subscriber doesn't understand the message or can't pull the message or is throwing an exception, this should try 10 times, fail, move to the deadler, he hold it for 14 days, and then it gets dropped. So everything by default is 14 days unless you increase the count on both ends. So we're gonna add another one for our SQL database. I'm gonna add this one in here. Same deal. Create that one. And the reason why I'm going through all these steps, a lot of these things can be drawn through a infrastructure as code, whether using Terraform or Biceps, depending on what your choice is. But this actually gives you hands-on experience on how you can set up these things up. That's the reason why I'm walking through it through the wizard. All right, so now these two are set up now. Let's go back to our documentation and see what we have. So this last piece here basically set up the secure FTP. We're not going to do that right now because we want to make sure that everything we've done up to this point works. So we're just going to focus on the next 5-10 minutes on the connections, and then we can do some testing. All right, so I left the database here um, in this state. I need to grab my IP address before I forget and add that in here. Yeah, and you have to allow Azure services. So you have to make sure you check this box to allow it. It's still complaining because I have spaces. So, but it does validation check. So you have to allow this so Azure can talk to the database. So now we're connecting the Azure services and IP can talk to the database. Now it does interrogate IP. So if you even though you put in different IP address here, if it's not the IP address that is coming from, it won't allow access. So now we're in here, we can test connectivity by going to our query editor here. This is still in preview, by the way, but it actually works like a lightweight SQL management studio. And then we can authenticate. And this is how we test whether we have connectivity to SQL database in terms of connection strings, we'll call it that. That authenticate, no problem. I'm going to run a couple of tables in here, but we do need a schema for the SQL database piece. So I'm going to go to my code base quickly. And college, we're going to work with college. We're working with colleges today. So we want to get a schema that represents what we're working with. So we're going to grab this. We're going to create a brand new database in here. So right now we have no tables in here because it's a brand new database. Nothing is in here. We may have a couple of built-in store procs that are internal to the system. But now we've just added this table. This table is now created and does have all the rows and columns that we need to get going. So this is good. So now we have a at least schema that will allow us to put our data in here. All right, so this piece is done. So now we have to go back to our function app, and that's where we spend a little bit more time in there because this is the guy that's actually in. This guy actually manages all the connectivity for us. So we have to make sure that this is set up correctly. Now the config file, which I mentioned to you before, if we go back here, we need to upload this into our config folder, which we created, and then we can go through this and see how far it goes. So I'm going to keep that open. See, I can leverage this. Go back to our resource group. Come up from here, come up from here, and go into our storage account here. And then, like I mentioned before, that container here, we had a config. We need to upload those configuration files on our local machine over here. So if I right click here, go into reveal file explorer, we can grab those. Just come up with this guy. Right, so I'm grabbing this. Right, so let's come here. And what I'm doing here is basically uploading here. So I'll just grab it on my local machine, browse. I'm gonna walk through this and do some testing. Right, right. So all these files are in there now. Come out of that. Go to the storage browser. Two ways you can go in here. You can go in here in the storage browser. Storage browser I use a lot more because it's easier and more intuitive. So there's our config files here. If you look at the first one, which is basically handling. So the basis is this is the secure FTP piece. Now, some of the things that we notice here is the file share names, which we've created already, pickup folder, which we've created already. Remember, this is configuration of a code, so this actually calls out all the things we're going to be doing inside of our application here. So this is good to go. Paste that, save that, move on to the next one. Edit that one. This is copying our files. We don't have to worry about this one. It's already set up for us already. So we paste that, save that. Move on to the next one here. This is the upload process. So when we start out, one of the things we're going to be doing is that we're going to be taking our files, doesn't matter how big it is, I'm going to be breaking it up into shards or slices, as I mentioned in the beginning of the call. And we're going to use 200 because it's 201 because we have a header, column header, and we're moving CSV files. So that's basically why we have. So this is going to handle splitting our basically our files into manageable chunks when we do our initial test. So that's what that represents. This allows us to search NoSQL database. So when we move our data into this table, which you created here, over here somewhere in this table here, we can actually use this capability to do some searching. That's what this does. Keep going down our list. So if spots trigger, this takes our files, receives the files, and then puts it into our, this is the other side of the consumer side where we take the files off the service bus and we convert it into a JSON payload and we write it into our database, which we just created. We just created a database called college. So like that's ready, set, and ready to go. This one is just a sample one I put in here in case we need to do any conversion to JSONs. Don't worry about that one. There's an extra one to it's in there. This is the block trigger. So this guy handles when files get dropped and shards. His job is to wait, almost like a trigger. Remember I mentioned the block trigger. As files get triggered, to pull the files and then to put it into our service bus. So remember we had a topic called requests. So this is the publisher side. We're putting things in our service bus. We have the connection string. And then we have to provide a content type. So that means the service bus understands the type of file that's been put into the service bus. Very important to put content types in your service bus. I always recommend doing that. No SQL trigger. One more SQL. Nothing to do here. And what's the next one? This is to search as database, SQL database once we have data coming out. So once data comes out, we can search our SQL database. Save that. This is for reporting. So we have time, we do some reporting today. And which one is this one? Upload process. So just testing when we initially when we first test this, we want to test our API. So we're going to use an upload process. So we have an endpoint that we're going to use to test our upload. There we can set up the secure FTP. This is for encoding our reporting. So basically for encoding if you want to do reporting, so that way we're not sending clear text across our URL. And then liquid templates are basically similar to transformations. We mentioned ETL and ELT. So when data is in our database, maybe the end user doesn't want to consume as many of the properties that are defined. You can actually go in here and do some logic to say, well, if certain things exist, you can rename them, you can call it that. So that's something that's pretty cool to have. If you have a view model that, oops, I didn't want to do that. That was a mistake. Do that one more time. If you have a view model that the end user wants to consume that's different from the backend database, it's an opportunity to do it here during the ELT process. Liquid templates, which is another liquid templates, actually allows you to take your data and convert it to HTML. So if the end user wants the data in HTML, you can do that as well with using a liquid template. These other liquid templates, we're not going to be doing much with them because they're just basically copies. I shouldn't really have them in here anymore, but I think we're all done here. So now we're in the position where we can start doing some real testing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up Postman, which I actually looked at before. If you go up here, I've done this training a few times, so there's a couple of them out here. We're going to grab the URL for our function app. So we're going to go back to our function app here. The base URL is here. So the base URL is basically here. One of the things you can do is click on it and test to see whether your function app is up and running. As is up and running, no problem. I always recommend doing that if you can, because sometimes I've been stuck in test mode and wondering why it's broken and the function app is not working. We're going to change the base URL because that's what we need to change for this test.